Hello, welcome to this week's How's the Market, Pensacola. Well, how do you get around these interest rates? How about lease options and contract for deeds? Are there any threats for that? All right, if you watched last week's show, you know that I said I was going to bring up some interesting financing again this week. Last week, we talked about an assumption and how you can assume some of those. This week, we're going to talk about something that I haven't seen a lot of, but I'm starting to see come back, especially with rates in the 8s, 7s, 8s. A buyer's going to come out and they want to take advantage. I don't mean that in a bad sense, okay? They want to take advantage of the rate that a seller locked in a few years ago. 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5%, right? Which is a lot better than 8. So they start to get creative. And there are things out there called lease options and contracts for deed. Now, I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. So let me get all that disclaimer out there, right? But I want to tell you the difference, especially in the state of Florida, between those two. The way a lease option works is you have two separate contracts. One contract is, we're just going to say $100,000 for easy math. And there's not much out there right now for $100,000 that's worth buying, but for easy math, let's call it that, $100,000. You are going to lease from me, a regular lease. Forget buying, you're going to lease from me. I have the property, you're leasing it from me. Regular lease, you're going to put a deposit down, just like you would a lease. You're going to put the first month's rent. We're going to set up just like you were renting this property from me. Separately, there is going to be a contract. The contract basically says this: over the next however long we negotiate, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, then you have the right to buy this from me and I must sell it to you for X price, right? So we'll say 5 years. Over the next 5 years, 60 months, you have the right to pay me $100,000 for this property. Lease has nothing to do with it. These are separate. In order to get that option, you have to do what's called consideration. In order for a contract to be valid, you have to have an offer, acceptance, consideration. Those are 3 components of a valid contract, right? So consideration, you give me some money that is in consideration. All that does is lock me up as the seller. I now have to sell it to you for $100,000 anytime over the next 5 years. We could have some other terms in there, like as long as the lease is honored, as long as this isn't better than this is. But if, there's all kinds of other terms you can put in there. But these two are separate contracts, right? So lease option. If you start putting some of the monthly rent, which some people will want to ask you to do, putting some of the monthly rent towards the option contract, you've combined the two, and now you have what's called a contract for deed. Contract for deed is different. I'm going to get into that for a minute. You can, however, at the end of the lease or your option, say, okay, you know what? Here's the option. If you buy it from me in the next year, you pay $100,000. If you buy it from me the year 2, you pay $99,000. That's fine. We can do a scale down as long as this contract is separate from this contract and the two do not merge. That's called a lease option. The deed does not change hands at that point. Okay, so the person buying it doesn't technically own the property yet, okay, which means they cannot go out and take depreciation on it, which is why some people don't want to do that. One of the big benefits of owning real estate is depreciation. So you make equity on something. Let's say I flip a property and I made $50,000. Well, if I can depreciate some or accelerate depreciation on another, then I can counteract my tax liability, okay? So, but if you don't own it, you can't depreciate it. So there is a little bit there that some buyers don't want to do. Instead, they want to do what's called a contract for deed. A contract for deed means that you take it subject to, okay? In other words, I'm going to deed you the property. You now own it, but it's subject to the loan that I already have. Okay, if you own it free and clear, that's fine. That's just called owner financing. But if it's subject to another lien, well, that's a little different. What's the big trigger for me as the seller if I do a contract for deed? Well, just like I talked about last week, there's something called a due on sale clause. That due on sale clause says that if I deed the property from me to anyone else, my entire mortgage is due. It's in most of the contracts. Right? I haven't seen a mortgage in a decade that doesn't have that in there because they don't want people just deeding stuff over to anybody else. Does the bank always call the note? No. Most of the time they don't, especially if they continue to get paid. I don't care, right? Make sense? So a lot of buyers will ask you to do that. Do a contract for deed. If you do a contract for deed and you take it subject to, there are some serious criteria that you want to take into consideration. One, you have lost the property. So if you merge a lease option, it becomes a contract for deed. If you have a contract for deed, the property is no longer your ownership, although the debt, if you take it subject to, is still your responsibility, technically. Now, we can put something into where they're going to pay it, they're going to move things on, but this becomes a little iffy. All right, I'm not real fond of contract for deeds because let's say the buyer stopped paying. What is the penalty? Well, if they haven't put a whole lot of money down for the contract for deed, then they just walk away. Is it going to hurt their credit that the payment's not made? Nope. It's going to hurt mine as the seller's because I'm still responsible for the loan. Can I just evict them? No, because you don't own the property, or I don't own the property anymore, right? So I have to go through the full foreclosure proceeding in order to get the property back. And Lord help you if you happen to own this property in a corporation, because the state of Florida says you can't represent your own corporation, which means now you have to hire an attorney. There's attorney fees. I say all this not to scare people away from contracts for deed or subject twos. I say this to just be very careful because I've seen some subject twos come out and it says, okay, in the deed, right, and the contract, it basically says, all right, we're deeding this over and in 6 months you're going to pay the second lien off, for instance. So this particular one I'm thinking of had 2 liens. In 6 months, we're going to pay the second lien off and we're going to take it subject to. Okay, what happens if you don't pay the second lien off? You just keep making the payments. Well, that seller can call you on it, but if they're in financial trouble, why would they? Okay, so you haven't really fell up to the obligations. And then 2, there was no indication of when they had to pay the second or the first lien off. So what's to stop them from holding that first lien for another 25 years? And me as the seller, I still have it on my credit report. It might be paying fine, but does it impact my debt to income ratio? You bet. I don't have a standing lease. And all of a sudden I go to buy another house somewhere and I have to explain to the bank that I sold something and violated a due on sale clause with another bank, but we won't violate it with you. There's a lot of risk to a seller for a contract for deed, or if you merge a lease option wrong. I say this strictly from experience. I have merged a lease option in my past that wound up being a contract for deed. And when the person stopped paying me and I tried to evict because we had a lease, because I had accidentally merged the two or unknowingly merged the two, they went out and hired an attorney who said, you can't evict, and told the judge, you don't have what's called subject matter jurisdiction over this eviction. It has to be an ejection because it has to be a foreclosure. It's a different court that handles foreclosures than it handles residential evictions from a lease. So my eviction got thrown out. We had to start over with a foreclosure. It took 4 months to get in front of the judge, and then they begged for another 3 months to move out, and the judge granted it. So it took me 7 months of no payments, them destroying the house before they could get out. So when I say some of this stuff, I say it based on experience, not just from clients of mine, but also personal experiences. Are these bad inherently? No. This year, I bought a property subject to. All right. I bought the guy needed to get rid of a property. I bought the property subject to, but the way we dealt the financing is I built in that I was going to refinance that within 45 days of acquisition. Because the way that the bank that I was working with, I needed to own the property before I could refinance it to get it. There's a whole structure there. There was a different structure, right? So I had to structure it differently, but that worked out from them. All right, I made the payment. We closed on the 1st, and I made that month's payment. And before the end of the month, I had refinanced. That's fine. I explained all that to the seller I was buying it from. The buyer was in dire straits, right? So I explained all that to them. They went, okay. There's nothing wrong with either one of these inherently, as long as everyone knows the risks. And if we get those risks, as long as we can mitigate them to a certain point, I think you're going to see a lot more lease options come out there. There's nothing wrong with option contracts. We see option contracts all day long in the commercial world. Give me an option to pay you $2 million for this place and give me 2 years to line up the financing, or give me 2 years to get a conglomerate of investors together and then line up the financing. So I'm going to go build equity partners, and I'm going to build debt partners, and we're going to exercise this option, but I need 2 years to do it. I need 24 months, or I need 30 months. I see that all the time. And hey, for that, we're going to give you $20,000 option consideration. Remember that consideration money I was talking about? I'm going to give you $20,000 option consideration money for us to start that, and for you to be obligated over the next 24 months to pay, for me to be able to buy this at $2 million based on this criteria, right? If I don't close, you get to keep the 20 grand. All right. But I have 2 years now to do it. I see that all the time in commercial stuff. I'm seeing it more and more in residential. There's nothing wrong with a lease option as long as it's built right. All right. The two are separated. So I just have to warn people, please separate those two. Because that has come back and bit me quite a few times. There's nothing wrong with this out-of-the-box financing options that I've been going over these last couple of weeks. These are legit ways of communicating and legit ways of acquiring properties, legit ways of disposing of properties. You just have to know how to do it all. All right? We can't do balloon payments. There are certain things you can't do if it's a qualified loan versus non-qualified. We'll go over that in another episode. All right? That's owner financing, and we can talk about that too. I've seen some of that happen here recently. I've done it recently. It was a couple of lots I had to sell that I just said, hey, owner financing, you put 20% down and then I'll finance the rest for 5 years. Cool, that works. All right, and it worked out for them, it worked out for me. That's fine. There's huge tax benefits to being able to take your payments over 5 years for a seller. But anyways, hopefully that makes a little more sense. I know this episode is going to go quite a bit longer than I normally have because we haven't even got to this week's numbers yet. But I wanted to explain these lease options and these contract for deeds or subject tos that you see a lot of. All right. There are inherent risk for the sellers. There's not as much risk for the buyers. Hence why we're starting to see a lot of investors come up with that as an option. But there's nothing wrong with doing either one of these as a seller, as long as you understand all of the risk and try to mitigate some of those. If you're going to do a contract for deed, or if you're going to take a subject to, have it in the contract or have it in the deed or whatever, to where if it's not paid off within a certain amount of years or a certain amount of time, whatever the time is, but you guys negotiate, that, it automatically reverts back, that there is a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So there's ways you can mitigate this risk as a seller and still offer this to a buyer. And there's ways that buyers can take advantage of this as a buyer and be able to lock in a lower rate. That helps with cash flow, even in the short term. It also helps with aggressive depreciation. So it helps counteract any of the other profits you've made from other venues, if you will. All right, enough of that. We are 15 minutes in and I haven't even shown the numbers yet. So let's get down to the numbers for Escambia and Santa Rosa County so you can see this week's inventory. Let's go. Signifies a sacred commitment. Whoops, wrong clip. Sorry about that. Let's go. All right, if you've never seen the show, you don't know that I always start with this slide right here. It says if we have between 6 and 7 months worth of inventory, it's what's called a neutral market. Anything greater than 7 months is considered a buyer's market. Anything less than 6 months is considered a seller's market. What the slide doesn't say. Anything greater than 9 months considered a hyper buyer's market. Anything less than 3 months considered a hyper seller's market. Let's jump immediately over to Escambia County. We'll start there. And if you notice, again, nothing under 50 grand. Shocker there. We get up to the 350 to 400,000 and we're slightly over a hyper sellers. Everything else is a hyper sellers until we get up to $550,000. 550,000 to 650,000 is just a sellers. And then 650,000 plus is either neutral or a buyer's market. Like I said last week, I know this is showing yellow because it hasn't quite clicked over to 8 according to this thing. But yeah, this would be considered a buyer's market. It's over 6 months inventory. If you remember our slide right here, greater than 7 months. Last I checked in my math, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, 7.2 is greater than 7. That'd be considered a buyer's market. Let's jump over to Rosa County real quick. Looks like here, the 650,000 to 700,000 has entered a buyer's market. It's the first time we've seen a buyer's market in Santa Rosa County, and I don't know how long. And any price point. Any price point. So that's technically a buyer's market. Everything else below that are up to $550,000. We're going to call a hyper seller's market. Now, I know I'm going to get somebody saying, well, Shane, the 350,000 to 400,000 is 3 months. So that's considered a seller's market, not a hyper seller's. Technically, you are correct. Technically. Would I market it differently? Probably not. I probably wouldn't. Now, the 550 to 600,000, you got some inventory there. You don't quite have as much buyer's pull at that point. So, yep, that is a seller's market, not a hyper seller's. The 700,000 plus is a seller's market, not a hyper seller's. But the 650 to 700,000 is a buyer's market slightly. All right. Even with these, you're going to have to differentiate as a seller. Buyers are getting a little more picky. The interest rates are causing prices to kind of stagnate. I'll go and see if I can look next week. We might have the numbers from October to where our listing prices are. If you looked at our listing prices, I think a couple weeks ago I showed September's listing prices, and you saw them kind of coming down some. And it wasn't that the prices were coming down, although the prices of the listings were coming down. It was that people were overpricing stuff and bringing it back down to market. So our average listing price was coming down. Plus, we're sitting in the holiday season. As I'm sitting here recording this, it's Halloween. It's Halloween 2023. So these numbers are a little scary still, but it's more the buyers concerned about the interest rates and more the sellers concerned about the interest rates, because there's a lot of sellers I talk to that are not wanting to get rid of their 3 and 4% to go find a 7 and 8%. They just don't want to do that. So that makes sense. I think as far as the mortgage market is concerned, we're probably going to start to see a higher uptick of second mortgages being originated because people don't want to give up that first, not with that rate. And they don't want to downsize. I mentioned that last week in the Wall Street Journal article that came out that said even folks that are normally downsized this time of their life are not downsizing because they have a 3,000 square foot house that they're paying $2,000 a month. And if they now move down to a 1,600 square foot place, it could still be $2,000 a month. So why? It doesn't make any sense. All right, I always end the show talking about our instant offer program, so I want to make sure I do it again this time. Basically, our instant offer program is when I come out, there's a lot of work needs to be done on the property. I can walk the property and give you an offer within 24 hours. This is a cash offer. There's no commissions. You don't pay any fees. There's no nothing. This basically is a conglomerate of investors that I represent that will come out just like any other investor would and tell you what that will be. Close, a couple weeks, however long it takes to make sure the title's clear, all right, which... Let me tell you what, the title has been an issue. We're going to talk about some permits. Probably, I might even talk about that next episode. That I'm starting to see some title stuff come up, and it's like, wait a minute, hang on. So it'll take a couple of weeks to get the title done, but we can close very, very quickly. I always use the example of a customer called me up and said they got a heck of a job offer. I mean, like a 200% pay raise, but they had to be in Dallas in like 10 days. And the property needed massive work. And so they had saw the show, they called me out, we talked. It worked out for everybody. All right. They got exactly what they needed to move, make things comfortable. And he told me, he said, Shane, I'm putting Florida in my rearview mirror. He's from Texas, got a heck of a job in Dallas. If I'm not mistaken, he's doing something with the Mavericks, which great. Good on him. Tell Cuban I said, hey, but yeah, those type programs work. And I've had other people that have taken my offer and used it as a floor. to where, hey, here's the offer, let's put it on the market, see if we can get more. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I've had things come in to where the market offered them $15,000 less. I've had other times where the market has offered them $20,000 more, and they look at me going, well, I got more with that. That's fine. That's fine, because I am only here to try and serve the customers. Relationships to me are much more important than one transaction. Always have been. Always have been. I'd much rather be concerned about a relationship than one transaction. So some people just use it as a floor and test the market, knowing we've got that. If we got the time to do that, great, let's do that. All right. But if not, if we just want to come on the market, that's fine too. Either way. But I always want to make people aware that that program exists. There is a link down below to discuss what's going on and how that absolutely works. Hopefully that was a little educational. I know 21, 22, 23 minutes is a little bit longer video for me. I usually try and keep them around 15. But I wanted people to understand that lease option and that contract for deed, especially that subject to. There are risks for sellers and subject twos. Buyers are really wanting to use them so that they can capture that interest rate that seller locked in a few years ago. All right, and as interest rates continue to rise, they're going to see some more and more of that. And there's nothing wrong with it as long as all parties understand risk and all parties mitigate it to the best they possibly can. Thanks for watching. Happy Halloween. We'll talk to you next week.
I'm a man on a mission.
My mission is to help people break through all the noise out there and
Don't need no permission.
I want to help you get to actual truth. Don't you just want the truth?